And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show this evening. I'm Stephen Grootes. On a day in which the JSE hit another record high, 88,717 points. I say another because it has happened earlier in the week, but this time this is where it ended. And I suppose there are a few questions around this. One is, despite all of the global headwinds against us, I mean, I can't remember a time in my certainly working memory, I think you'd have to go back to sanctions in the mid-1980s to think of a time when we were the focus of so much attention from the United States and from the US president. Back then, of course, Reagan opposed sanctions. But you'd have to go back to then to find a time when we were going against the kind of US tide. And so I find it fascinating that despite all of it, the JSE had record highs. Intriguing reasons for that. And one of them is, it would seem, a big meeting that Xi Jinping is going to chair, a symposium of the private sector in China. And would seem that some people from the tech sector have been in. Viv Govender will just explain the linkages to us about that. Tencent, Naspers process and the JSE. I think that's going to be quite important. Other issues as well, of course, around gold. And I think that is very interesting. You know, the gold price is very high, partly, and we heard conversations about it earlier in the week, partly because of Trump, partly because of the US President Donald Trump. And so, you know, once again, it does seem that what Trump taketh with threats, he giveth with the gold price. I've been fascinated today, two stories about companies, South African companies, with long track records that are involved in big projects or have gone overseas. The first was Met Air, and they went to Turkey. They bought a car battery company, and they've had to sell it, and they've made quite a big loss. And the main reason is the hyperinflation in Turkey. And we forget sometimes how important a prudent central bank actually is. And from time to time, yes, we get cross and grumpy at the decisions that they make, but look at the situation in Turkey where following what can only be described as an unorthodox monetary policy, they've had quite long period of hyperinflation. The result of that is that you just can't go there and invest and make money, seems to be the story, certainly for Met Air. And then Aveng, big share at one point on the JSE, construction firm, like other construction firms, had a difficult time. They've got a big project in Queensland in Australia. They've got another one in Singapore, both running behind schedule and both costing them quite a lot of money. Just shows some of the problems that they have. We'll talk a little bit more later about Inverroche, the gin brand. And I remember 6 months ago or so, we spoke to their founder. We were just talking about the gin business. Now they're part of a global group, and we'll just find out a little bit more about that, how that's going. And are they going to bring more products? I mean, how do you keep your identity, your local kind of still buyer identity in the Western Cape when you're now part of a big global firm? I think that's going to be one of the questions. Don't forget, a little bit later, the Friday Biz Blitz as well. Good to hear from you tonight on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
So I suppose it's fair to say that our week has once again been dominated by the words, perhaps the words more than the actions, of the US President Donald Trump. Quite a lot of those comments, the executive order on Friday last week, all involving South Africa. And never before have we had this kind of language, this kind of action coming at us from a US president. And yet, despite that, despite the global uncertainty around tariffs, the JSE hitting a record high today, the rand doing quite nicely against the dollar as well. Azaya Mhlanga, chief economist at RMB. Azaya, good evening. Good to talk to you. It's a strange question to ask, but considering the lack of certainty, considering the, I suppose, instability, the risk of it, considering that Trump clearly has us in his sights, why is the JSE still doing so well?
Look, good evening, Stephen. I think if you look at South Africa's fundamentals, far more stronger than they were last year this time, and that helps to withstand the external shocks. But there's also a recognition that a lot of the news that's coming out of the U.S., particularly President Donald Trump, is in part political, but also lacking a lot of, economic basis. And we have also learned from the tariffs that were imposed on Mexico and Canada that were suspended for 90 days, some reversed. So there is that recognition to say the approach that's being taken is not something that we can actually say it's for certain. It appears as if it's a negotiating tactic, and markets are starting to price that in. And as a result, there is a tendency to not do a lot in response to the announcement, because you would have to do something every day, given that there are a lot of announcements on a daily basis, statements on Twitter, which would then destabilize the decision-making process. So best thing is sit back, watch how the announced actions are implemented, and we're starting to see the lawmakers in the U.S. actually pushing back, which means the impact is likely to be far less than the initial announcement proposes.
So in other words, the market is beginning to judge Trump on his actions rather than just his words.
Absolutely. So judge action, implementation, rather than just an announcement.
It's still okay. So, I mean, I get that. And I think you can see that. And I think you can see that not just on our market, but kind of everywhere. You would still think the Rand would be under quite a lot of pressure, and yet it's charging along just fine.
Indeed. And that speaks to the resilience that has been built over the last year or so within the South African economy. If you look at SA relative to other emerging markets, we are busy talking about reforms. Load shedding has been very minimum. We haven't had much, except for the weekend special of load shedding that we had recently. Otherwise, our energy security has significantly improved. There is some improvement on the logistics side, even though there is a lot that still needs to be done. And if you listen to the State of the Nation address, continues to affirm that economic reforms are going forward. Now going into local government reforms, how they are financed, ring fencing, electricity tariffs and water tariff for infrastructure. All of those things are positive. So there's a lot more confidence in the South African economy now than we had a year ago. And that confidence makes investors, local and offshore, to look at South Africa in a different way, to say, if there were to be a disruptive global event, which emerging market is likely to withstand given what they are doing from a policy side? South Africa stands positive relative to other emerging markets.
It also just reminds you of how important the end of load shedding is. How much of this is about a stronger gold price? Is that insulating us from some of this? I mean, that's helping the JSE, it's helping the gold shares on the JSE, but just a stronger gold price generally must have an impact.
It does have an impact. Central banks across the world have been accumulating gold reserves given the uncertainty, and that helps to push the gold price up. We're still one of the countries that is a gold mining country, which means it benefits all the gold mining related stocks on the JSE. So that actually filters through into better performance on the equity markets.
There's a lot of talk about, South Africa, the government, someone needs to do something about Trump. There's this sort of belief, I think, this publicly stated belief that sending a team to Washington will change Trump's mind. I don't buy that for a second. I do accept that the president, I'm talking about Cyril Ramaphosa, now our president, has to be seen to be doing something, and it's sort of in his nature to try and talk it through. It's also, I must just say, the absolutely politically mature response, and we should congratulate him for that. But is there really anything else we can do to protect ourselves against Trump? I'm not so sure that there is. I mean, if you look at what he's saying about AGOA, if you look at what he's saying about other things, I don't know if there's much we can really do at all.
There is always something that we can do. It's really to deal with what we can control as a country, which is really to deal with the structural, impediments that are preventing the economy from growing between 3 to 5%, if not more, that can reduce unemployment. So when we have a lot of global uncertainty in geopolitics, it serves to actually fix what is broken within our own economy, that is within our own control. And that then reduces how reactive we are to global forces. That's one way. That needs to continue irrespective of what's happening in the global environment. The second one is there's always a positive outcome from better diplomatic engagements than engagements on X, for instance. It's calmer heads, much more measured conversations, and there aren't a lot of, too radical, opinions in closed rooms. That always, benefits in terms of the outcome. So there is a benefit out of taking such an approach, which is why there are a lot of, diplomatic processes that usually takes place when countries are at different ends of an argument.
I do wonder if there's going to be a global. I mean, if Trump does half of what he says he's going to do, there'll be some sort of big global realignment around trade. I mean, the EU will have to impose tariffs against the United States. They don't want to do that. So there's going to be some really big shift. I mean, something very interesting could well be around the corner in the next 2 years.
Look, the shifts have already been there. It's not the first time that we're going to see the shifts. With Trump's first presidency, we saw a global realignment. If you just look in terms of hard data from China in terms of how it shifted its exports from the U.S., there's about a 9 percentage points decline in terms of China's exports to the U.S. between 2018 and 2020. And there was also a 9 percentage points increase in the exports of China to Mexico and Canada combined. So you can see just a reorientation in terms of the export flows. So what this is doing is it's going to reshape global trade and capital flows trends from countries that appear to be unstable or unreliable partners to countries that would be reliable partners. That's what we are seeing in the data. The U.S. might find itself isolated. If all the other countries are going to respond, they're likely to change their trade patterns to try and de-risk themselves from the policies that are going to be with us for the next 4 years.
I mean, the global international trading system that we have is largely the work of the United States. You can't. I mean, I find it almost hard to imagine that world without it, and yet I think you must be right.
Look, there isn't a world that is going to be without the U.S. as it stands. It's a quarter of the global economy in terms of GDP. It's financially, quite entrenched in almost every economy, which means it's almost impossible to operate without intersecting with a U.S. technology firm, with the dollar, with the U.S. trade to some extent. So for now, the global economy is exposed to U.S. risks, but they will continue to de-risk as much as they can, as we've seen in the first Trump presidency.
Zion Planga, thank you very much indeed, Chief Economist at RMB. Really do appreciate the time on The Money Show this Friday evening, 20 minutes after 6.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Viv Govender's portfolio manager at Rand Swiss. Viv, good evening. It's a fascinating story. You've been talking about the JSE, record highs tonight, driven largely by Naspers and Prosus, both up incredibly strongly. What's been driving their share price today?
Well, I think one of the things we saw recently is that the Chinese tech sector, despite some of the issues it's had with regards to sanctions and so on, remained incredibly innovative. DeepSeek, for those that are in the AI sphere, which is quite a familiar name, it's a Chinese program that was built. Initially, people claimed it was $6 million compared to the $500 billion that have been talked about before the things that are done in the US. But it actually was a bit more than that. It was probably close to $1 billion in terms of all the expenditure going through. But even so, it was very innovative, it was significantly cheaper than what OpenAI, for instance, is offering. And I think the Chinese government is probably coming around to the idea that this is an important, aspect of their economy that they have to do something about. And over the last couple of years, Xi Jinping has been quite negative about the tech sector, putting restrictions on things like gaming and, putting people like Jack Ma into, making him disappear. You know exactly what happened to him, but he disappeared for a few months, came back very apologetic. You can make your own mind up about what that meant. But I think the fact that he's now attending a conference as well as this, DeepSeek situation makes some investors out there think that the Chinese government is about to go on a more pro-tech, spin, which will be very positive for these companies, which have really been hammered over the last few years.
So, this would suggest then, it's just one meeting. Can we really see from that there's going to be a big change in attitude from China's leadership? Do you think that that's a valid assumption to make?
Well, I think the thing is that you have to understand just how badly some of these companies have been, hurt over the last little while. So if you look at, for instance, Tencent, even after the recent rally, it's still down 50% from where it was back in 2021. This is pretty much the price it was back in 2018 or so, and you would see a similar thing with companies like Alibaba as well. these companies have been really badly hurt, by the Chinese, the inverted commas, crackdown on themselves. With Alibaba, from about, like, say, 2020 or so, is down, 60%, despite being up, 50-something% in the last little while here, you know what I mean? In the last, like, say, few months, it's up 50%. Even with that recovery, it's still down 60% from where it was back in 2020 till now. So it is a case where these are really beaten down companies. And one of the big reasons they were beaten down was because what the Chinese government was doing to them. And now there's going to be a bit of a switch around, a bit of a change around. There is a huge opportunity for them to recover, and I think that is probably what the market's hoping for at the moment.
The gold price, not close to the record high it was at earlier in the week, but still very strong and still having a big impact.
Oh, yeah. I think this is also in the part to do with China and part to do with some of the stuff that's been happening, globally. I think that the tariff plans, etc., that Trump is putting out there, as well as some of the moves that has been made against places like China, means that certain places in the world are not as happy to hold US dollars as the reserve currency to the certain extent that they were in the past. And if you're not going to hold US dollars, let's say to go to the Bitcoin route, one of the other options out there for you is going to be gold. And so I think we are seeing to some extent some of that coming into play. Also, I think, the fact that, interest rates have come down a little bit kind of takes away some of the penalty for holding gold as opposed to holding some of the other commodities out there.
And the story with platinum, it's sort of been, hovering around the kind of $1,000 an ounce mark, just over that now. But it has been going back and forth a little bit. And obviously this has been a very difficult time for platinum miners. I just don't see much incentive to buy platinum now. Are you seeing a sort of strong future?
Well, it's up 10% year to date. So there is a bit of recovery. Because, yes, it's been pretty bad for the last basically 5 years, almost flat for the last 5 years. But year to date, there has been a little bit of recovery coming through. I think, partly, the EVs are not as attractive as they once were. Trump has come out and said things like, we stick away the EV, incentives out there. He's basically going to remove, I think, some of the hard caps were put in. For instance, they were saying by a certain date there will be no internal combustion engines built and so on. And obviously, EVs don't need platinum the same way that catalytic converters are being used in internal combustion engines. For those that don't know what platinum does in these things, it cleans the air, the exhaust that comes out. So it's an environmental thing. But yeah, I think we are seeing a bit of a bad time for EVs, and that might be helping the platinum price at the moment. Longer term, however, I do doubt that the platinum's prospects are going to be that great, just because of the fact that I think EVs are probably an inevitable technology down the line.
Viv Govender, thank you, Portfolio Manager at Rand Swiss.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, let's just pick up on that a little bit. Yesterday you heard a conversation about how some big asset managers are pulling away from their stated commitments to invest in projects that won't lead to climate change. Next week, though, the Africa Green Economy Summit is being held, bring a lot of people in this space together. Ian Banner is the founder of Go Green Africa in South Africa. He's arranging the summit. Ian, good evening. Considering that the US is now refusing to deal with climate change, the timing of this is very interesting. Are you still seeing growth in the green economy in Africa?
Absolutely. It's an essential part of the future of Africa. There's so much work to be done infrastructurally within Africa, etc., and efficiencies are required. And going green is an efficient way of doing things if you apply the correct technology. And it's not totally exclusive or independent of other energy mixes that exist already. But it's a, off-grid technology. We know how important it is to keep the lights on. Zambia, as I understand it, is off for 18 hours a day. People need power. How are they going to get it? The infrastructure's not there. A green solution, renewable energy, and things around waste and green cars, which we just spoke about now, the green motor industry, the blue economy. These are all essential matters, and we better start paying attention to the environment because it's shouting right now.
This is the thing, is that the politics may have changed, but the laws of science have not. And neither of the laws of economics, and economics is going to drive this quite strongly no matter what happens in the White House.
Well, absolutely. And, people love to say, but hang on, a Cambridge professor said every 10,000 years there's a cycle, a weather cycle.
Yes.
temperatures go up by 2 degrees. Let's take that as a given. The reality is there's now 8 billion people on this planet. They weren't there 200-300 years ago when it was 2 degrees hot and it didn't matter and there were fires happening. Now it really matters. So we have to start thinking hard about how we behave as human beings. And whilst Mother Nature's wounded, she's fine. If she has enough of us, she'll wipe us out and go to sleep for 1,000 years. So actually, we're talking about saving humanity. It's a big issue.
I worry that when it comes to politics and decisions, people are always thinking there's something else that's more urgent. And I mean, that's kind of Trump in a way. Do you still see as much appetite to deal with this as you used to see?
Well, we started Africa's Green Economy Summit as one of the table legs of Go Green Africa, and that came off the back, Stephen, as I think the staging of Formula E in Cape Town. I always said we have to have purpose at the center. And next week we'll have some 71 financial institutions and companies listening to pitches from 57 different green companies that have been chosen out of about 500. And there's over $2.2 billion of pipeline that will be presented for people to engage with and to fund. And the appetite is there. People would not be coming if it wasn't there. It's a real appetite and it's a real need.
Ian Banner, thank you very much indeed, founder of Go Green Africa here in South Africa, just after 6:30.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
So I've been thinking a little bit about, gin. And that's not just because it's a Friday, and it's not just because we're doing an interview with someone about it, but about how tastes in alcohol have changed. 50, 60 years ago, you watch an old James Bond movie or something, no one's drinking whiskey. They'll drink brandy. They'll drink port too sometimes, but you don't see much of that anymore. Now, you'll see far more value for whiskey than you will see for brandy. And what does that tell you? It tells you how tastes have changed. In my own memory, which is not quite 50 or 60 years, you'll notice that there was a time when people who drank gin were kind of drinking maybe one brand. Suddenly, about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, there was a kind of explosion in gin, particularly in South Africa. But it wasn't just here. It became fashionable, became a sort of younger person's drink. There are all sorts of reasons as to how that happened. Well, we'll get into that a little bit with the founder of Inverroche Gin. And she's now, of course, going to be working, I suppose, part of the Pernod Ricard family, because Inverroche was bought by them this week. But just a reminder of how things change, how tastes change, and how, I suppose, what you think is going to be certainty for a long period to come isn't always when it comes to certain tastes. I mean, I'm sure in your own lifetime you've gone from this to that to that to that. And sometimes, along with that, the brands change. And there's, certain drinks or things you drink when you're a bit older. Well, that allows the marketers and everyone to go to work on you and catch you at the right age. Looking forward to that conversation. Maybe you've got a story to tell about it on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567, and of course voice notes on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
Well, news this week that the distillery that creates Inverroche gin has now been bought by the international spirits group Pernod Ricard. And as you might know, Inverroche, unique really, because it's basically infused, I almost said injected, infused Fynbos into its product. It's created something they say is unique and really been a big feature, if you like, of the sort of gin boom that we've seen not just here, but in other parts of the world as well. And the founder of Inverroche, so the person who's, I don't know if she's now an employee of the bigger company or what her status is, but certainly will always be the founder of Inverroche, is Lorna Scott. She joins us now from what I presume is the headquarters in Stilbaai. Lorna, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good evening, Stephen. Good to speak to you again. And no, I'm not actually at the brand home. I'm visiting my son and grandchildren in Cape Town.
Okay.
So just down here for the weekend. But yes, you're talking about what am I going to be doing going forward? And I think the simple answer to that is I remain involved, not only because I remain the founder forever, but my agreement with Pernod Ricard is that I remain as a consultant into the future for as long as I'm needed and for as long as I'm able, in a creative capacity, looking at new ideas and continuing to develop new, creative collections, as we call them, and also a whole new kind of pivoting as we do within a brand to make sure we stay ahead of the trends, but also that we innovate and advance, kind of leading the pack as we've done from the very outset of our brand.
I don't know if you'll answer this, but was it a condition of the sale that you stay involved?
No, not at all. It really evolved as such a fruitful and lucrative, I think, on many levels, not just financially, partnership. I've learned so much from my association and partnership with Pernod over the last 5 years that it got to this point, and it was almost a given that I would remain involved. So the terms of my continuation really is, so easy. Really, nothing really changes except my shareholding. So I remain with the finger on the pulse, as it were, in terms of the creative input.
And the people who worked for you still work for you, still produced in the same place, all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really been a wonderful journey of commitment to what was my vision at the very beginning, that it will always be made in Stolbay in the same way, and that the people that have been part of the journey to not only grow the brand, but create its strong roots and links to the place that, gave it its origin, will always be, part of the journey. They'll never leave, as it were. So it has to always be made in Stolbay, as I say, in the same way we always did, because it's a luxury brand. As a luxury brand, or super premium, as they also call it, there are certain intrinsics that you simply don't change. If you consider brands like, Chanel and other very famous and well-established brands, luxury brands, the one thing that never changes is the way you make it and the authenticity and the place that gives it its unique character. So in that respect, I'm comfortable that the future is very optimistic for the future for Inverroche in Stolbay and as a South African brand in this industry.
When you look back, when you were founding it, I can't imagine you thought it would end like this. It's quite a journey.
I think I always had, from the very beginning, when the idea was first sort of germinated, to create something that was, a bespoke brand that could sit alongside all of the other luxury brands. Like Champagne speaks of the French culture, as whiskey speaks of, and represents the Scottish culture. I wanted to create that authentic brand that would be able to do that for who we are, not only in South Africa, but as an African brand. And that is where the idea was always from the very beginning, that it needed to be established as a potential global brand, which is where it is going. We're already in almost 30 countries. And despite all the issues that we're dealing with in the current climate in terms of, the new regime in America that gives us all, sleepless nights to some extent, the plan has always been to, look at the full-scale global potential where the markets are that would be receptive to the kind of exclusive luxury product that Inverroche is. So yeah, it's fulfilling my ambition, and I needed Pernod as the second largest alcohol-producing company, only second to Diageo globally, to be able to take the brand to all four corners of the world, including still back to America.
So you are expecting then quite a lot more global growth. You're in 30 countries now, but I imagine they're going to take financial ownership of it. They will have the resources that you need to get into a lot more markets and to grow the brand. We'll get onto different types of it later. Yeah, but that's the big plan now.
Yeah, so it has huge potential, but also remember that there are certain limitations by virtue of the fact of how we make it and where we make it. That the volume ambitions that we have will always be less than. We're not looking at producing a Jameson or an Absolute in terms of volume. It has restrictions also when we talk about the way we make it, because we grow all our own rare botanicals on our own farms and properties in Stillby. Everything is hand harvested and hand produced. So there's a limitation on what we envisage. But the ambition is most certainly for it to, lead in very select markets globally. For example, into America, we are only really focusing on 3 of the states, not the whole lot of them. So there's California, I think Chicago is one, and the other one is actually Florida. So there's a very targeted strategy to show up where not only where the appetite for luxury brands continue, but where we already have a foothold. And many expats, of course, as you know, have helped me to grow this brand from the very outset. And they, of course, live in all these 4 corners of the world and, want to have something from home, not just when they watch, the Springboks, continue to win as they always do. And to celebrate that with a gin and tonic all the way from Stillby, what better way to do it? People don't do it with, just a beer and a Vorsie anymore. There's alternative ways of doing it.
Springboks have gone up market.
Exactly.
Are you expecting now growth in more offerings? In other words, more things under the Inverroche brand? As a tongue-in-cheek example, when, George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, suddenly we have a lot more Star Wars stuff. As your grandchildren might well tell you. I'm not expecting it to be on the same scale, and I'm sure you didn't get $4 billion for Inverroche. But are you expecting now to have a bit more time to sort of focus on the creative side of things, to create more, I want to use the word flavors, but I don't think that's super premium enough as a word.
No, flavor is the wrong way. I mean, when we talk about creative collections, we tend to look at, how can we create a unique product that expands the brand story, but also continues with the essence of what it's all about, the intrinsics of the ingredients that we grow that's very specific to the 3 biomes that we represent, being fynbos from mountain, coastal, and the limestone region. But there are quite a few that are in the wings that we've been working on growing, very rare botanicals in our own nurseries, like the little Kukamakranki. And that is going to be one of the key ingredients in one of our creative collections that will probably see its first exhibit, hopefully, in the later part of this year, early next year. But we also already launched in December our first cream liqueur called Botanique, which is absolutely delicious and is giving the other, shall we say, famous cream liqueurs an easy run for their money. So, you're quite right, developing new ideas. There'll be more time for me to focus on that. But it's also looking at, some new ideas. Perhaps, we'll be looking at a perfume somewhere along the line. Who knows, what the future may hold. And with my partnership with the French, I think that is most certainly something that we will also explore.
I look forward to the creation of a nonsense elephant story to go with your cream liqueur.
the cream liqueur. You need to try it. It's absolutely delicious. It'll be in Norman Goodfellow stores and so on now.
That's enough, soon. Lorna. Now. There are interesting stories about spirits, and tastes do change. And I used the example earlier that, brandy used to outsell whiskey almost 2-1, and now it's the other way. And whiskey is much more popular. And it's not just because Scotland is more popular, and it's not because of all people, just to keep with the Star Wars theme, Harrison Ford is now selling a whiskey.
Seriously, standing there with a kilt.
Yes.
But don't expect me to, dress up in any way anytime soon.
There's a lightsaber joke there somewhere. Anyway, so
you're quite right, though, Stephen. The shall we say, the trends do, go through cycles, but there's been quite an interesting dynamic that has brought us to this point over the last probably 2 to 3 years. I think it probably started just prior to COVID. But, the next generation is looking for something very different. And it's been a main driver. It's not only that, gin goes in and out of flavor, as do many other, categories of spirits. At the moment, rum and tequila seems to be on the rise, and that will go a cycle as well. The ones that always seem to retain their popularity are really the ones that play in the luxury market, which is where we are. But my point that I want to make really is about this, how the next generation, which are the, I don't know what are they, Generation Z, X, I don't know, we've probably run out of alphabet letters now. But the millennials, I think, which is driving this, seeking for something that is less conspicuous, that is authentic, that is transparent and truthful, in light of what we're dealing with at the moment, where we never know what is true and what is not true, particularly with AI and everything else that's happening. The ability to be able to demonstrate that what you walking the talk and that you are truly sustainable and that you are, truly committed to the things that you say you are and do them in the right way makes a difference. And that's what the next generation is looking for. So gin in South Africa has remained in our category at the top end, but there's been a remarkable change in the consumer spend, particularly in the middle section. So there's been a down trading for those products that sort of under 200 Rand a bottle, which is an economic driver. But the growth that we've seen, and we continue to lead the market in the super premium segment, 1 in every 3 bottles that is sold is an Inverroche bottle. And we continue to grow the market in that category. So that's an interesting dynamic to demonstrate what people are looking for.
Lorna, talking of the next generation, it sounds like one of them might have got out of the bath and discovered that their granny was not where they wanted her to be.
Yes. Once Omar.
Thank you. Good to talk to you. Really appreciate it. Good luck. And good luck with bedtime too. Lorna Scott is the CEO, former CEO, is the founder, will always be the founder of the Inverroche Distillery.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Time for the Friday Biz Blitz. You know the number, 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. First question on the Friday Biz Blitz. If you don't know the answer to this, you haven't been listening. Pernod Ricard has acquired a controlling stake of which gin, which was founded by Lorna Scott? Very easy question. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. You know how it works. If you get it right, we move on to the next question. If you get it wrong, we move on to the next caller. Pernod Ricard has acquired a controlling stake of which gin founded by Lorna Scott?
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011 883
0702.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the African Mining Indaba 2025. First question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Pernod Ricard has acquired a controlling stake of which gin founded by Lorna Scott? You know the number. AK in Ilova, our first caller tonight. AK, good evening.
Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm well, man. How are you?
Good, thanks.
What's the answer?
It's Inverroche.
Inverroche. You were obviously listening, AK. Okay, second question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Neil Froneman is the CEO of which mining giant? Were you
that one I don't know. No.
Were you listening yesterday?
No.
Neil Froneman? Often hear about him? No?
No,
right.
Sorry.
All right, okay, thank you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Neil Froneman is the CEO of which mining giant? And he's a person, it's a company that you will not have been able to ignore over the last few years, I think, simply because of how many times you found that the person is actually in the news. But Neil Froneman, the CEO of which mining company do you think that is? And there are not a huge amount of companies to actually look at. Let's go to Tebogo in Soweto. Tebogo, hi. Neil Froneman, the CEO of which mining company?
Hi, Stephen. Why do I only sense that I phone to win? Sibanye called.
Tebogo, it's because you're a winner because you listen to this radio station. That's why.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll take the bragging right. That's my Valentine's Day gift from you.
Well, from me to you. All right. Question 3. Who performed in the halftime show at this year's Super Bowl?
This guy who said you're not like me, he's not like us. What's his name? I'll just keep.
He was talking about someone too, I think. Yes. Who performed at this year's Super Bowl's halftime show?
Yes, not Drake. Who's the Party Next Door is one of his songs.
Yeah,
I've got his.
He's very much not Drake. Yes. Tebogo. Oh, that winning streak didn't last very long.
How could I? Yes, okay, thanks, Stephen. Let's give somebody a chance.
All right, Tebogo. 011 883 0702 0214460567. Who performed this year's Super Bowl halftime show? It's a massive name. Okay, do I have to tell you? Are you sure? Shall we see? Let's see if we've got just enough time to kind of sneak it in before we go to the news. Eddie in Bedford View, do you know the answer?
Lamar.
It is. What's his first name?
Hendrik.
Kendrick, yeah. Now I'll give it to you. Eddie, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the Friday Biz Blitz. That's right. Kendrick Lamar performed at this year's Super Bowl halftime show and had the highest audience for a U.S. television broadcast since the 1969 moon landing. That is going back a long time. You're with The Money Show, 7 o'clock.